we'll now go to item 15, page 135, and welcome
I'll move.
Warren McLennan. It is moved by Councillor Watson. Do I have a second? Councillor
Yes.
Greg Sayers, thank you. Warren, we've read the information, and do you want to highlight anything there?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think really this is a similar item to the East-West link which came before your consideration last month. Since then, of course, we have both for the East-West link and the Northern Corridor improvements project, submissions have been lodged with the Environmental Protection Agency, and we're now into this next phase of NZTA preparing evidence, ourselves preparing evidence. There'll be some rebuttal. We clearly had some concerns with the proposal which are set out in our submission, and it may well, and I've already had a ring from NZTA to say, can we start to meet as we start to prepare our evidence and they look at theirs. So it may well be that we don't, if we can reach agreement on various concerns, then we won't have to present evidence for those particular aspects. So the reason for this political reference group to continue is to get that feedback and to be able to make decisions as we go along.
Thank you, Warren. Questions from members? There being none? No? Warren, thanks for the whole process that you've set up to support the elected members, local boards. It's been a really good cross-divisional team, just really, like East-West, and I think we've got a very solid submission, a well-informed decision. So I thank you for your leadership in that regard. We've met for many hours on this, and I think we're councillors, IMSB, Tauhanare, thank you, and local board members are extremely grateful. Thank you. It is moved, it is seconded. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Now, members, we're going to go to 19, and it's on page 181, and welcome John Duguid.
Maybe John
Why are we jumping?
It's moved by Councillor Denise Lee. Do I have a second? I'll put it on the table.
No.
Councillor Cooper, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of...
I've just overheard a question of why this has been accorded precedence. It's about, or John, you can explain that. It's about the order which helps us, this allows us to be better informed on the items to come. But John, do you want to expand on that?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. So items 16, 17 and 18 all deal with potential future changes to the Auckland Unitary Plan, and this is the report that sort of sets the scene for where staff are heading with recommendations for the Auckland Unitary Plan. So this is the scene-setting paper, essentially, just a bit of an outline of potential future plan changes to the Auckland Unitary Plan, and really just a bit of a briefing on private plan changes, what they are, how they differ from a council-initiated plan change. We are starting to receive requests from developers, landowners to amend the Unitary Plan already, so there's a specific process around that we'd like to talk to you about. Phil Reid and Tony Reedy will talk you through the report in a little bit more detail, but safe to say this is really starting to set the work program for the Unitary Plan going forward. We're making great progress with the appeals on the Unitary Plan. I think we've probably in the order of 20 appeals out of the 107 or 8 now resolved, either through withdrawals or agreements with the parties that have now been signed off by the High Court or the Environment Court, or in some cases we have had some High Court decisions, mostly in favour of the Council. So the appeals are progressing well, and this is really looking to the future, what's in the pipeline from an officer point of view, and really seeking your endorsement of the potential work program going forward. and some guidance around how we deal with these private plan changes, particularly over the next couple of years. So I'll hand over to Phil briefly.
Okay, good afternoon all. Probably the first thing I might do is just highlight the thematic areas that we'll go forward with in the unitary plan. So probably one of the first things to acknowledge with a new plan coming into existence is it does need time to demonstrate how it is performing. So the plan changes that we've got coming ahead of us are ones which aren't necessarily looking at the evaluation of the performance of the plan, because that does take time to actually see whether or not it is achieving the objectives that we want. These plan changes fall into maybe 3 areas. The first of which is the actual accuracy of the plan. So we've found as a result of the use of the plan that there are a number of mistakes or minor errors that we've found, which are both mapping errors as well as text errors. And that also stretches through to some of our schedules as well. So there'll be an item coming forward about the notable tree schedule as an example of that. What we're also finding is that we need to continue to provide for growth. And so we've got some structure planning initiatives which are on the go. And coming out of those, we're able to actually move to what we call live zoning, where previously we've had future urban zones. So that's a continuous process of continuing to manage growth. And probably the main or other third area is what comes from above. So the government, through Ministry for the Environment, have a program of national policy statements and national environmental standards, and that work has been ramping up in recent years. And there is an expectation, certainly on my behalf, that as we go through this year, there'll be a number of those that come out that direct us, essentially, to make changes to the unitary plan.
Questions of Phil or John? Councillor Simpson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you please explain to me the private plan change point 11? Who decides to adopt or accept the request in whole or part? How does that work?
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, I was circulating a diagram or 2 diagrams, one that shows the standard council-initiated plan change under the Resource Management Act, and the other one that deals with private plan changes. So we should really talk you through the key steps on that. And that
I'll hold my question till we've got the paper. And my second question, just while that's coming through then, are there any words missing from page 183 under heritage, the 3rd bullet point? It says, but these are on hold pending the outcome of the Housing New Zealand appeal and what?
Something's dropped off here.
Might have to get back to you on that one. Something's dropped off through the
Yeah.
drafting process.
So I just wanted to know what that heritage one is. Sorry about that. But you can come back to me on that.
Noel Reardon, our Heritage Manager, may have the answer. He's in the room for another item, so we'll look into that. So really just to very quickly talk you through this diagram. So on the one side with the blue boxes is a simplified version of Schedule 1 to the RMA, which is all about amending a document such as the unitary plan. The council puts it out for submissions at that point. It's called a proposed plan change. We then have to prepare a summary of the submissions. There's an opportunity for people to lodge further or cross submissions and join the process. Then the may hold a hearing. That's provided there's one submission, council has to hold a hearing, but if there are no submissions, then there's no need for a hearing. Stage 5, council decision, and then those decisions can be appealed to the Environment Court under certain circumstances. Most submitters can appeal to the Environment Court, and then the plan becomes operative. So a little bit like the unitary plan, but it has its own special process. That's the fairly standard process. Now, on the other side, quite a few more boxes, but this is the private plan change process. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the proposer. So this might be a landowner, a developer, or an environmental group, a heritage group, iwi, for example, can lodge a request in much the same way as you lodge an application for a resource consent. You can actually lodge an application to change the unitary plan.
Whole unitary plan?
Well, that would never pass muster or would probably never get across the line, but in theory you could potentially lodge to change the whole unitary plan, but that would be pretty nonsensical. But you can certainly apply to change any part of the unitary plan, and anyone can do that. In the same way as anyone can apply for a resource consent, anyone can apply to change the unitary plan. Council receives the request. We can ask for further information, much the same way as Council does for resource consents. Once that information is supplied, we can commission a report. We can then modify the request with the agreement of the proposer, and then we have to decide, this is the key point here where it branches off. The council then has to decide, and there are 4 options. On the left-hand side, reject the private plan change request. Adopt it, and at that point it really becomes the council's plan change if you adopt it. If you accept it, it's still the applicant's plan change, but you're agreeing as council to take it through the process of submissions and a hearing. And on the right-hand side, the RMA says that you can convert it into a resource consent application and say this is just someone wanting to breach the height control on their property or put a cafe in a residential area. That's more of a resource consent than a plan change. So those are the 4 options. And then it really tracks through to the normal plan change process at that point of submissions, a hearing, decisions and appeals. So hopefully this is fairly useful. So the next question was, who makes decisions on private plan change requests? So as we've said in the report, the delegation sits with Tier 4 officers in the council to make a decision on those requests. What we're recommending in the report is that we exercise that officer delegation in situations where a request is going to be rejected because it fails to meet the criteria in the Act or the additional criteria that we've recommended here. But if officers feel that the plan change has some merit, we would then bring it, we're recommending that we don't exercise that delegation, that we would bring those requests to the Planning Committee for a decision to accept, adopt, reject or treat as a resource consent. Because by that point, the applicant would have had to have lodged a fairly significant deposit, done a lot of work to actually get it to the point where a decision can be made, and we feel that that is something that should be brought to the Planning Committee. What we are seeking, because we're starting to get a lot of requests and some of them are really just testing the waters, they haven't done a lot of homework, we do want to be able to exercise the discretion to say, for the first 2 years, which is specified in the Act where council can reject fairly easily, that if someone doesn't meet the criteria on the board in terms of being in line with the future urban land supply strategy, in line with the Auckland plan, following structure plan guidelines in the unitary plan, giving effect to monitoring of the unitary plan, if it doesn't meet those sort of criteria, then we should be exercising the officer delegation for those first 2 years. Otherwise, the committee would potentially be inundated with fairly lightweight requests.
So supplementary, if I may. So I get the reject because it doesn't meet within, that thing. The adopts whole or part of. So when you think part of a request had merit, would you bring that if it was just part of?
That's correct.
To the committee?
Yep.
Yep.
So if we're talking to an applicant, we think
really
that it's got some merit, then we would bring it to committee with a clear recommendation to adopt or adopt in part or accept.
Right.
Yep.
And just one final, if I may. Are we keeping a list somewhere of all the people who are submitting, just like a master list? So you actually have a bit of an idea for the 2 years. Yes, we have rejected, 2,000 because they don't meet the criteria. We've, potentially pulled some yes, some maybes. Are we keeping that documentation?
So in the committee report, we do note that we intend to bring a report to the committee every 6 months with any requests that are formally rejected under the officer Tier 4 position delegations. Some of the requests we've had to date, there'll be some commercial sensitivity, so we didn't put them in the report because just like a resource consent application, they might come and talk to council staff about an idea on an option for a site they're looking to develop. So there are some commercial reasons why a customer or applicant has a right to retain confidentiality in that situation. But once it gets to the point where officers have exercised the delegation to say, no, rejected, we'll report that through to the Planning Committee.
Right. So in essence, you actually do get everything. Planning Committee will see everything, even the rejects, because they mightn't be in detail, but they'll be listed.
Yep.
That's correct.
Councillor Denise Lee.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and happy to be moving this and especially to endorse really helpful tools like this. John, it's great for us to have a handy one-page, double-sided tool. So my question is in regards to your potential council-initiated plan changes and the list that you've got there, and no doubt those of us around the table would see some on the list that might be particularly pertinent to wards that we represent. And I'll just quickly mention Onehunga and the heritage list there. Your sequencing of that, how will that be decided? I realise some might have more urgency than others, so where they, I know that the process will be to come back to this committee, but decisions around sequencing, how is that made?
So we've already prioritised 3 or 4 based on resolutions of the governing body previously. There was a resolution to look at the errors that Phil mentioned, so we're following through with that. There is LTP funding for sites of significance to mana whenua, so there's a council commitment to that plan change. So those are the sorts of criteria we would apply. If there's a governing body resolution, if there is something signalled in the long-term plan. But beyond that, we haven't actually developed the criteria yet. We're really just getting moving on that. So my suggestion would be that when we come back to the committee with a sort of 2 to 3 year work program of changes to the unitary plan, we bring forward some criteria at that time as well to explain our thinking. But yeah, I mean, Phil has touched on some of the things that if it's coming from central government, then we potentially have no option. If it's a clear flaw in the plan, the hearings panel actually recommended some future pieces of work that the previous council was aware of and endorsed, things like the heritage surveys, additional heritage sites. They're all in there as things recommended by the panel or endorsed by the previous governing body. But yeah, apologies, we don't have any criteria yet to seek endorsement of those.
Maybe I could just add 1 or 2 other things. So one of the really important things is the actual functioning of the plan and workability. So where we receive feedback that certain provisions are falling, for instance, into non-complying by mistake, that's one of the criteria that we'll use. Also, if there is some sort of environmental issue which is rising rapidly to the surface that needs to be addressed, that's obviously an issue. And yes, as John touched on, there's sometimes directions from national environmental standards, for instance, that within a 1 year period going into effect, you have to have carried out your plan change.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cashmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Timelines, the standard RMA timelines apply as we step through the process on the private plan change, so that's 20 working days? Yep, cool. And what happens after 2 years? Are there significant changes or?
Many of the criteria will remain the same. So you're still going to be looking at whether or not there is a true database or monitoring information which proves that there is actually an issue. You're still going to be looking at good resource management practice of whether or not there is alignment to the strategy that we've got.
Yep.
You're still going to be looking at things such as the functioning of the plan and whether or not the private plan change contributes to that or potentially makes that more difficult. So I think there are some universals that continue beyond 2 years. 2 years is really there to recognise the fact that the review process of a plan is a very involved process and therefore the issues have recently been considered.
So just if I came to Chair, on the fringes, and it'll be in Councillor Sayers' area, it's certainly in mine, we have a lot of people who are now in mixed rural production, but are in actual fact lifestyle blocks, and they're wanting to be able to realise some of their value in their land by further subdivision. And there's going to be a lot of appeals coming through to you from groups who are saying, around us is countryside living, but this 100-hectare block in the middle is mixed rural. Why can't we be countryside living when in fact that's what we are? So yeah, how is that going to play through?
So, well, step 1, we do have appeals before the Environment Court on the rural subdivision provisions in the unitary plan. Some fairly significant appeals there. So I think we have to wait to see where that lands in the Environment Court before then looking at spatially, do we have some areas that should be rezoned from rural production or mixed rural to lifestyle or countryside living. You're absolutely right, though. There is huge demand out there for lifestyle subdivision, and we're getting those requests, as I'm sure some of you are as well. So I think get through the Environment Court appeals, see where it lands, and then the most likely is a piece of work to come up with some strategy for how we deal with rural areas going forward.
Just certainly it's got heavy demand.
Councillor Newman.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually following on from Councillor Cashmore, but yeah, look, I mean, you've kind of answered it, but I would imagine that there's potential also for a couple of public plan changes here depending on the outcome of any resequencing to align with the future urban land supply strategy, and that probably will have better clarity of that later this calendar year as to inform what we might have to do in response to any resequence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a critical piece of work, and we've got the Whenua pipeline change as the next agenda item, and so as the future land supply strategy is adopted and we go into structure planning, then there will be subsequent plan changes required to implement that. And so we see that for the Plans and Places Department as a significant piece of work in terms of future plan changes to the unitary plan. Yep.
And that's just not private plan changes, that also potentially triggers some quite significant public plan changes to ensure that we're lining up between the FOLs and the unitary
Well,
plan.
that's correct, and probably predominantly in terms of land area, council plan changes we'd like to think.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Finally, Councillor Hulse.
I'm fine to leave my question, thank you.
Councillor Mikely.
In terms of the administrative plan change, does that include the few localised anomalous situations?
Yes, it does. So, yeah, where there are incorrect zonings, those sorts of things, yes.
Can I ask, in regard to future plan changes or potential council-initiated plan changes and criteria, I note, of course, section 2.5 of RMA, and then a second list of criteria, future urban land supply, Auckland plan, etc. But I think there's an elephant in the room, given what we all now know of the scale of the problem we have with the old combined sewerage area and the outflow or overflows of, according to Water Care, of 2.2 million cubic metres of sewage, stormwater, diluted sewage into the Waitemata Harbour. Should not infrastructure be emphasised here? We've taken it all as a given, that it's all available, that it's all there, but now we know we're a long way off enabling that. We also have a network discharge consent, which is also legally problematic. Would not, apart from future urban land supply, you would also include future urban infrastructure?
Yeah, and there's probably two of those bullet points that do talk to that issue. The first would be where it is a proposal which does actually fit within structure planning. Then within the structure planning criteria that we've got within Appendix 1 of the Regional Policy Statement, we do have that requirement around the provision of infrastructure. And the last one there, which is the environmental outcomes expected. So there does actually need to be, within the assessment of environmental effects within that private plan change proposal, how that design is going to address the environmental outcomes.
I just think that we need to start, rather than lowballing this or assuming stuff, and we've all been guilty of that, that we are dealing with a problem that's revealed to be significant, and we're still a long way off from solving it. So I think it needs to be a factor when we make these decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no further questions. Are there any comments on this paper, members?
Good to have.
I think people have interspersed comments and questions. It was moved and seconded by Councillor Denise Lee and Councillor Cooper.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, will this paper be in the minutes?
It's tabled, it's received, it goes online. It does. Thank you. So all those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. John Dogood, Phil Reid, Tony Reedy, thank you for your contributions.
Thank you.